that Israel is an apartheid state.
Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan facing criticism today.
CNN's Jake Tapper joined the chorus of voices from conservative Democrats to Republicans to far-right media in smearing Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib for stating a literal fact. So in Tapper's case, he used the guise of journalist to purposely obscure the reality around that. And I'm going to show you his clip. I'm going to show you Rashida Tlaib's actual words, including missing context that was not in Jake Tapper's segment. I'm also going to get to, of course, the facts shortly here, and I will also show you a couple other enlightening clips to give you more context on this entire topic. So first here, the words from Rashida Tlaib. I'll get to the actual video of her saying this is in Jake Tapper's piece, so you'll see it shortly, but here is the quote. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib said on Tuesday that, "I want you all to know that among progressives, it becomes clear that you cannot claim to hold progressive values, yet back Israel's apartheid government." Now, the only thing that's maybe wrong or off about this is that it is not just about progressive values. This is literal. Israel literally has an apartheid government by definition. And almost every major human rights organization, including the UN, has acknowledged this. So some information on that. Human Rights Watch, time to recognize reality of Israeli apartheid and persecution. B'Tselem, an Israel-based human rights organization, this from 2021. Regime of Jewish supremacy from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. This is apartheid. From Amnesty International, Israel's apartheid against Palestinians, a cruel system of domination and a crime against humanity. Going on to right here, the comprehensive report, Israel's apartheid against Palestinians, sets out how massive seizures of Palestinian land and property, unlawful killings, forcible transfer, drastic movement restrictions, and the denial of nationality and citizenship to Palestinians are all components of a system which amounts to apartheid under international law. This system is maintained by violations which Amnesty International found to constitute apartheid as a crime against humanity as defined in the Rome Statute and Apartheid Convention. By definition, Israel is an apartheid state. That is a fact. So any disagreement with her on that is just you're fighting with facts. You're fighting with reality. That's what it is. So I'm going to show you quickly here, Tapper segment, one more headline from the UN. Israel's occupation of Palestinian territory is apartheid, UN rights expert. So again, all experts recognize this. This is nothing crazy here has been said. But here is Jake Tapper's report, and notice how one-sided, purposely one-sided this is.
Also in our politics lead, Democratic Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib of Michigan facing criticism today from what several of her Jewish colleagues have deemed anti-Semitic comments. Here's what Tlaib, the first Palestinian-American woman to serve in Congress, said at a virtual event yesterday.
I want you all to know that among progressives, it has become clear that you cannot claim to hold progressive values, yet back Israel's apartheid government. And we will continue to push back and not accept this idea that you are progressive except for Palestine any longer.
The CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, slammed the comments, saying that Israel does not have an apartheid government and said that she should not be imposing a, quote, litmus test in a tweet, saying, quote, Tlaib tells American Jews that they need to pass an anti-Zionist litmus test to participate in progressive space. Some of Tlaib's Jewish colleagues in Congress agreed. Florida Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz called her comments, quote, outrageous and, quote, nothing short of anti-Semitic. New York Democratic Congressman Jerry Nadler, sometimes called the dean of the informal House Jewish Caucus, tweeted, quote, I fundamentally reject the notion that one cannot support Israel's right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state and be a progressive, unquote.
And that was the entire segment. Completely one-sided, putting words in her mouth, things that she didn't even say, claiming Tlaib said those things. No mention at all about what human rights organizations have said. No mention about what the UN has recognized. So I'm going to get to more context as well, just giving you a part of Tlaib's words that was not shown in that clip for obvious reasons. And I'll get to a lot more context as well. First, I just want to show you that, of course, Tlaib did not say what it was claimed there that she said. Here, The Intercept, one of the few places actually covering this properly. Tlaib explicitly refers to Israel's apartheid government in her remarks, making clear that it is the apartheid nature of the government that she stands in opposition to, not the idea of the Israeli state. Now, let me get to, just to show you. Yes, of course, the RNC, Jake Tapper right along pushing their propaganda. Here, the RNC putting out that same clip, framing it as somehow her saying the quiet part out loud. Yes, the UN here. The UN saying the quiet part out loud. Recognizing that Israel, by definition, is an apartheid state. Ridiculous. Quick clip here from Bernie as well. It's from a few years ago, but it gives you... this is what I have said for ages.
It's not anti-Semitic to be critical of a right-wing government in Israel. That is not anti-Semitic, okay?
And it really is that simple. Criticizing a government cannot be anti-Semitic. Are you not allowed to criticize Israel, the Israeli government, at all? Like, wouldn't that be authoritarian in nature? To just bow to power, can't criticize their government at all, because if you do, you're an anti-Semite. That's insane. And by the way, Bernie Sanders, Jewish. Not that you have to be Jewish to make these points, but it is worth noting that there are people like Bernie Sanders out there, many of them, many Jewish individuals that do recognize the obvious apartheid nature, the obvious apartheid state of Israel. And I'll get to another example of a journalist in a bit here. But what I find more anti-Semitic is to equate all Jewish people with the government of Israel. Like, that in itself, that is actual anti-Semitism. Criticizing a government, not anti-Semitic. Now, let me get to more context around Rashida Tlaib, what she also said in her message that was not played on CNN for obvious reasons.
This past year, you all, Amnesty International and the UN joined Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem come out with the same conclusion that many Palestinians and Israelis have long known for decades, that Israel is an apartheid state that is systematically, through laws and actions, privileges one group over the other and doesn't value all human life equally.
Isn't it interesting that Jake Tapper didn't play that portion of the video, because then he would have to acknowledge that, yes, the UN, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and Israel-based human rights group B'Tselem have all recognized that Israel is an apartheid state, as I showed you earlier. Just the obvious attempt here to push simply one perspective that is not based in reality at all. It's one thing if there was like a honest disagreement between two sides and he showed one side, that would still be wrong. But to show only one side, and the side that is by definition factually incorrect, how can you possibly trust anything Jake Tapper does now, knowing that he does shit like this? This is why people don't trust mainstream outlets like CNN, even when they are correct. And look, they do a lot of actual reporting. They do a lot of actual real news. They do. I criticize them, but they do real news as well. But garbage like this is what hurts them and hurts the ability for mainstream media to be taken seriously by anybody. Now, this has been going on for a while between Tapper and Tlaib. This is from 2020. This headline here from Refinery 29, no, Jake Tapper, Rashida Tlaib is not anti-Semitic for criticizing Netanyahu. So, he was putting that garbage out again a couple of years ago. I actually covered that in this video here. So I can link to that below this video under sources. Check that out afterwards. But to comment on something else brought up in Jake Tapper's piece. So this Jonathan Greenblatt piece or tweet from ADL was also brought up in Tapper's segment. And in reply, you have Peter Beinardier. He is a Jewish journalist, works for Jewish Currents, is the editor at large there. I'm going to show you a clip from him shortly as well. But here he replied to Greenblatt saying, in July, we pleaded with Greenblatt to visit Masafer Yatta when he was in Israel, which is a portion of the West Bank where there is a lot of Palestinians being evicted from their homes because they simply are not Jewish. That is why they are being evicted. This happens all the time, but this is one of the largest evictions in the last 50 years in the West Bank. So he says, we asked him to see the homes that will be bulldozed because their occupants aren't citizens of the country in which they live because they are not Jews. Apartheid is a slander. How would he know? Here's a clip from Beinart. This is back in 2019, him discussing when he came to the realization of what the Israeli government is doing.
I say this as an American Jew. My children go to Jewish day school. I lead services in an Orthodox synagogue. Judaism is the center of my life. The first time I went to spend time with Palestinians in the West Bank, it was a shattering experience. The only thing I could imagine would be similar for American would be going to visit the Jim Crow South. When you see people living under the control of the state with no rights, they cannot become citizens. They cannot vote for the state that controls their lives. They do not have free movement. They need a pass to move from city to city. They live under a military legal system. The consequences are more brutal than we can imagine sitting here.
So Peter Beinart is an actual journalist. He is somebody who is able to learn, grow, change based on his experiences, based on what he has read, based on the knowledge he gains. That is what a real journalist does. They don't just take one side and then push that one side and push out all the other information. No, Beinart is a real journalist, and he deserves a lot of credit for being one of the voices out there, one of the loudest voices in trying to educate people about what is actually going on in Israel. Now, let me get to just a few more things. So Anthony Fisher here of, I think, the Daily Beast. Daily Beast opinion editor. He replied in criticism as well, saying Biden's approval rating up, abortion bans polling terribly, MAGA candidates imploding, and what was expected to be a red wave midterm election now looks like a toss-up. Dems are feeling like they couldn't possibly screw this up. Rashida Tlaib, hold my beer. So let's just look at this from a purely political perspective. First of all, I can't imagine this will have any impact at all. I don't think most people even saw this headline or saw this story. But let's say they did. The issue that Democrats always have is with young voters, getting young people out to vote. Well, when it comes to this topic, this is the most recent information or data I could find on this. This from Axios. Most younger Americans view Israel unfavorably, poll finds. So if anything, and by the way, these numbers, even like 32-49 here at 47%, this isn't a good number for Israel either. So people are becoming more engaged, more aware of what is actually going on. What Rashida Tlaib said, if it would have any impact at all, which I don't think it will, but if it would have any impact, it would only help her and help Democrats generally. If this is the position they actually took on and were willing to actually fight for human rights, for the human rights of Palestinians. But, that's still a few years off, if ever. And on that point, here is two last clips that I think are important to watch. This is South Africa's speech to the UN, urging the international community not to ignore the increasingly weighty findings that Israel is perpetuating apartheid. And of course, South Africa has an obvious history with apartheid. Here are the comments.
While we work to address contemporary conflicts, we should not ignore long-standing conflicts, such as that of the people of Palestine, which has been on the United Nations agenda throughout the 7 decades of existence of this organization. We cannot ignore the words of the former Israeli negotiator at the Oslo talks, Daniel Levy, who addressed the UN Security Council recently and referred to the increasingly weighty body of scholarly, legal, and public opinion that has designated Israel to be perpetrating apartheid in the territories under its control. Israel must be held accountable for its destructive actions that have significantly impaired the possibility of a two-state solution.
So leaders in countries that once suffered under apartheid also coming out to call out Israel's obvious apartheid. Here as well, worth mentioning, Nelson Mandela also recognized this while he was alive. In a 1997 speech on the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, Mandela reaffirmed his support for Palestinian rights. Quote, "We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians." Last thing here on this note, anyone who is currently not willing to recognize this, anyone that has power, anyone in media not willing to recognize this, will look like a complete idiot like Theresa May does in this clip. So here she is asked about what she did to end South African apartheid.
You're about to visit Robben Island. You were active in politics in the 70s and 80s. What did you do to help release Nelson Mandela?
Well, I think what is important is what the United Kingdom did. And
What did you do? What did you do? Did you go on protests? Did you get arrested outside the embassy? Did you boycott South African goods? Did you do anything?
I think you know full well that I didn't go on protests, Michael. But what is important is the work that the
Did you boycott South African goods?
The work that the United Kingdom government did to ensure that it was able to give support where that support was
Hang on a moment.
needed.
At that stage, Mrs. Thatcher believed that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. Were you a loyal Conservative Party member? Did you think the same thing?
What was important was the support that the UK government was giving at the time, often support behind the scenes, but in other ways too.
But not Theresa May.
To ensure that we saw the result that we did in relation to the ending of apartheid here in South Africa.
A government led by a woman who thought that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. Now, you're going to be going to Robben Island. Aren't you going to be feeling guilty that at the time Nelson Mandela was on Robben Island, you, Theresa May, did nothing to help his release?
What an amazing journalist. I covered that story back when it broke as well. That's a few years ago now. Obviously, Theresa May, former Prime Minister of the UK before Boris Johnson came in. Now Liz Truss is there. But of course, she did nothing. She was in government, had power, did nothing. And not only did nothing, was on the opposite side of the issue. It's hard to say when things will change for good, but we are seeing the beginnings of that shift, I think. I'm not saying, the turnaround's going to be, tomorrow or anything, but to see places, to see, the UN, to see major organizations come out and finally recognize this, it shows you the beginning of a shift. And hopefully that full shift comes sooner than expected.